Hey everybody, welcome to Creature Clash, the only podcast where we talk about everything from D&D to SCP and everything in between. My name's Alex,
My name is Dawn.
My name is Adam.
and today we're going to talk about how annoying it is to edit a podcast. God, because I'm editing it and I can hear all the little noises that we make, like all like the weird little ticks that we have when we speak that we don't even think about. And it just sounds so awful when you listen to it. So it's like all the tiny little noises that you don't suspect that you make that I can just hear because it's all like amplified over audio.
Great.
See, yeah. But today we're gonna talk about Gremlins, classic, I believe, '80s movie about little gremlin demons, hence the term, that are start off as cute and cuddly, but there are some rules that you have to follow, otherwise they turn into these little demonic hellions. Now, the most debated thing about the gremlins is when can you feed them? Now, according to the movie, you can only feed them after midnight, and for some reason, this seems to be a point of contention for a lot of people.
I think you have to feed them before midnight.
Exactly, you have to feed them before midnight, but everybody's always complaining, but it's after midnight. It's always after midnight. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous take.
I think it's always both. It's before and after midnight.
Well, no, because midnight is 12 a.m., right? That's midnight. You go from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. After 12 p.m., then it's before midnight. That's how time works. Yes, technically it's always after midnight, but the movie is saying don't feed them after 12 a.m. but before 12 p.m.
Okay, but what if we're looking at a 24-hour clock?
What kind of military time bullcrap?
All right. Well, let's think about this. Like, don't feed them after midnight. Like, what is that? Like a biological thing? And we pick time is just time of day is just a concept as far as like a clock goes. It's not.
That is true.
Like what if I feed it at 11:59 versus 12:01? Why is there a difference there? I think it's always after midnight.
In terms of time, that's a good question, but that kind of applies to all animals, doesn't it? Like we say, well, certain animals only feed at night, but we came up with the concept of night versus day. So in an alternate world where the sun is out and it's considered night and the moon is up and it's considered day, that doesn't really make any sense.
I mean, that makes sense with the sun being up or down, but I'm talking about like noon as being like, so you're saying like when the sun is the highest, that's the changing point?
I think so. Like, because certain animals only feed at night when the sun is down. So maybe for gremlins, I think they're called mogwais when they're not gremlins.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right.
Because I think they go from mogwais to gremlins, and I think that they have to eat when the sun is at its peak. Otherwise, some kind of chemical change happens in their body and they become demons.
But they can't be exposed to sunlight or they die. So what is it? Like, I get them being nocturnal would make sense, but what's so special about noon? Why is that where you draw the line?
Because for me, if the rule is you can't feed them after midnight, but they are creatures, so they have to eat. So if you can't feed them after midnight, which would be in the AM, then to me that means that you can only feed them in the PM.
Oh, I agree. That's if I had to draw a line, that's where I would draw it to. I just speaking from like a biological sense, like it doesn't make sense that they're following an actual clock, not just their basic circadian rhythm. Like what's special about 11 p.m. like versus 1 a.m.
That's true. And how would that work during daylight savings time?
Right. And what about different time zones?
Ooh, that's a good point. Adam,
what if there's one in California?
And that's the most radical mogwai in the world now. Adam, you got anything to ship in here with?
I think I would have probably been a little bit more extreme about the time limit cutoff because after midnight is 12:01. But then 12:02 is after 12:01. You know what I'm saying? So it's completely different now. No longer midnight. That's following after.
So you're going with a very specific at midnight, at 12:01, that's after midnight. But then
Yep.
at 12:02, that's after 12:01. That's not after midnight. Therefore, you should be able to feed your little gremlin at 12:02.
Yeah, sure. Although I'm sure in the movie that was not at all how it went, but
Can you
it's been
imagine
forever since I've seen it.
trying to pick that loophole out for like a tiny living creature? Of like, you feed your mogwai at 12:02 and it turns into a gremlin, and you're like, huh, no, hold on a minute. I was told after midnight. It is after 12:01, not after midnight. You go back to the way you were. I guess it wouldn't make them as deadly then if it was that specific. Because I mean, who's going to feed their pet at midnight exactly?
Yeah.
That would just be asking to watch the world burn. But
Right. They're trying to at that point.
and they're trying to do it.
Okay, well then let's think of the question of like if you have one that's born in California and you take it to Ohio where it's 3-hour time difference, would it follow the California time zone or the Ohio time zone?
Well, how does that work when birds migrate south for the winter? Because they go from one time zone to another time zone, but they still have the base instincts there.
Well, that's what I'm saying though, is that clocks are just our concept. It's not like a bird knows what time it is. It's just basing it off of light.
That's true. Maybe that's kind of what it is with a mogwai as well.
So it would change.
It would probably if you took it. I've never seen Gremlins. I know, shocking. But do the mogwais burn in the sun, or is it just in their gremlin form?
It's all of them, I think, because there's 3 rules. You can't take them out into the sunlight, or I think it's light, but specifically sunlight, because they'll die. You can't expose them to water because they'll multiply, and then you can't feed them after midnight because they'll turn into a gremlin. But I think that they're still weak to that stuff.
See, to me, then that just brings up so many questions for the whole gremlin thing. Because if they could only transform into gremlins at night, and they couldn't do it during the day, then I would say that sunlight represses whatever DNA forces them to transform into actual gremlins.
So then you would put the cutoff, instead of being at noon, you would put it at like dawn.
Yes, dawn.
So would like 9 a.m. not be after midnight?
Yeah, because then it would have to be, you can only feed them between 9 a.m. and like 3 p.m. or something like that, when the sun is out. You couldn't feed them when it was dark.
See, that would make more sense to me though, is like if you could only feed them during the day, that would make sense. The specific times is what doesn't make sense.
Maybe, well, here's the question.
Unless-
Are mogwais created by nature, or are they created by something else? Because if they're created by something else, then they might follow whatever created them. Like, they might follow that person's circadian rhythm. They might not follow like a natural base instinct version. They might just follow their own natural circadian rhythm version.
So now you're getting into like magic, right?
Well, not necessarily magic, because you could create them through weird science or experimental means or something like that. But sure, I mean, technically, these creatures, I would consider them to be magic, because so far their basic biology, the basic way that they function, doesn't make sense by natural standards.
Fair enough. I'm not sure how they're created. I haven't seen the movie since I was a kid. We all should have done our homework, apparently.
Exist. I don't think there's anybody that actually specifically creates them, at least not in the movie's lore. But it would be interesting to see if that is actually how they function, because otherwise, wouldn't gremlins be running around, ruling and wrecking everything? Because the mogwais are going to eat when they want to eat, and so they could turn into gremlins, or they could stay mogwais whenever they wanted. So wouldn't the nighttime be completely overrun with monsters if they were a natural thing of this world?
That makes sense. You think they're a controlled species?
I do.
That would make sense.
Otherwise it would just, unless it's like, because the movie takes place in America, so unless they're trying to say that Europe and Asia has a real gremlins problem, then America. But yeah, I would definitely say that they are not I would definitely say that they're probably not natural. I don't know. Adam, do you have any take on that?
I on that specifically, they're alien. I don't know. They're who knows where they originated from.
They're
Um,
aliens.
yeah, they're aliens. But like how weird of a rule it is to that a creature cannot be exposed to sunlight, yet you can't feed them after midnight. So like the sun's not up, but they can't be exposed to sun. So it's like, how are they supposed to get their food naturally? You know what I mean? So they would have to be created by something.
Or
Well,
unless they're like only feeding after dusk before midnight if they were natural and they weren't eating before or after midnight.
And then they fast like the rest of the day. The rest of that like 18 hours or whatever that time frame is.
And that's a good point because I don't know how to pronounce it. They're small. They're like hamster sized, right? Or like guinea pig sized.
Something like that, yeah.
As I was,
Which small animals need to eat pretty consistently because their metabolism making heat, they have the surface area, right? The surface area ratio is different for small animals, and they're always losing heat to the environment because of it. So they metabolize faster. They have to eat more compared to larger animals than, you know what I mean, like comparatively, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have, like, as small as they are, they should be eating quite a bit.
although I think Adam actually brings up an interesting theory because what if they are aliens? What if they
Different
live?
race.
What if they live on the dark side of the moon, or what if they live on a planet where there is no natural sunlight like that? Because in the movie, when they become gremlins, and even when they're modelized, they're still like intelligent beings. They still have like fine motor skills and the capacity to create. So it could be that they lived on a planet that was in either more often than not darkness or constant darkness, and they just ran out of food there. So a small group of them came to Earth, got captured, and are being sold as pets.
Possibly. I looked up gremlin lore specifically, and this is kind of interesting. Before the movie was made, gremlins were already like a folklore kind of thing, and they're described as mischievous creatures that cause malfunctions in aircrafts or other machinery. That's what
Like that
gremlins
Twilight Zone
are.
episode.
Huh?
Like that Twilight Zone episode where the guy's on the plane and he sees a creature on the wing of the plane and it's ripping out bits and pieces, and everybody thinks he's gone insane because they can't see it, but he can.
I don't know. I haven't seen that.
Oh, you need to watch Twilight Zone. Anyone listening needs to watch Twilight Zone. Interested in general horror and weirdness. It's definitely worth a watch. But that is interesting. I didn't know because I knew Gremlins, like the term of calling something a gremlin, I knew was a thing before the movie, but I didn't know that the actual creature came from such a interesting past.
Yeah, it said that the term gremlin originated as a slang term in the 1920s among British pilots.
Interesting.
So this is pretty young folklore then.
Yeah,
Decently. Yeah.
1920s, yeah.
Oh,
You know,
it'd be like
actually though,
100 years old.
it did just occur to me that there is a part of the world that is in like 30 days of darkness during some parts of the year, Antarctica.
Yeah, even Alaska has periods of dark and light, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's either Antarctica or Alaska that
I
has
Yeah.
like 30 days of night or like months of night where there's like no sun. So they could live in those types of areas. Because,
Alaska, won't see the sun for 67 days come winter. And then they have 80 days of uninterrupted daylight.
Oh my gosh.
So you're saying like maybe they hibernate during that?
yeah, maybe they
Daylight?
gather food and all that other, like maybe they gather food and resources, and then they hibernate in some kind of cave in was it Alaska you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Alaska. So that's why, and they're native to that part, and they never migrated anywhere else. So maybe that is the reason why you don't see gremlins taking over the entire world.
And then Antarctica is half and half, 6 months daylight, 6 months darkness.
So maybe it's safe to say that they live in mainly tundra areas.
Maybe. But then that still supports the thing that they need more food. They're losing all that body heat.
Right.
Although maybe their fur is really thick.
Can they eat each other? Because if they multiply by water, then they can eat each other.
Imagine
Okay.
being on the short end of the stick on that part.
I was just born. Well, hamsters eat their babies.
Rats do too sometimes, yeah.
See?
I mean, anything, yeah.
It's not that crazy of an idea.
Okay, well that brings up the next point. If they're living out in the snow, or even if they're not, what counts as being exposed to water? Because think of snow as technically water, right? It's
Yeah,
frozen
it's frozen water.
There's water vapor in the air. If you expose one to some steam, is it going to multiply?
Imagine taking one to like a humid place, like, you know.
Right. What if one lives in Florida?
Yeah.
It's already dead.
You can breathe in the water. Well, no, the water doesn't kill them. That's how they multiply.
No, I mean, if it lives in Florida, it's already dead. Someone shot it, ate it. A crocodile got it. Something happened. It's already gone. You have to be an apex. You have to be an apex predator if you want to make it in Florida. Otherwise, you're just food for everything else.
Okay. If it lived in Houston, Texas, it's humid there, right?
It's pretty humid.
That's probably not a good example. Georgia, maybe.
Yeah, or even Ohio, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can feel the water sometimes.
I think maybe it has to be a large concentration of water, because once again, if we're just talking about air, like the moisture in the air, then the world once again would just be overrun by mogwais, because they would just be constantly multiple. There's not a cooldown period, is there?
I don't remember.
There might be, but it's probably not slow enough for it to make sense that any amount of small water would cause them to multiply.
Okay, well then what about snow? Does snow count as water?
Well,
I would.
Does it just have to be water, or is it any liquid?
I think the rule said water.
So
right,
maybe it needs to be like 100% H2O compound, and that's it.
Well, even tap water's not 100% H2O. Even water's not 100% H2O because it's constantly the hydrogens are moving around.
So maybe like 80%.
You want a specific percentage?
You gotta find that line.
Well, what if it's just liquid?
Okay, so like snow wouldn't work because it's a solid.
Right.
All right. Well, then what if you feed it a strawberry? There's a lot of water in that.
Well, also think about its anatomy. How does it move if there's like no liquid in its body? Like, is all that solid like a flexible tissue, muscle?
Well, I mean, it would have blood and water in it, but I mean, maybe its outer shell has to be completely submerged in some kind of liquid in order for it to multiply. And maybe it uses water specifically because any other liquid might cause genetic impurities. Like if you bathe a mogwai in blood, maybe the resulting mogwai is more evil or cannibalistic or something.
Okay, this says that Google says it's gremlinsfandom.com. If a mogwai gets wet, it spawns new mogwais from its back. Small balls of fur are approximately the size of a marble pop out from the wet mogwai's back, and then the fur balls start to grow in size before unfolding themselves into new and fully grown mogwais.
So all it says is wet.
It says wet, but I think the rule said water. But let me look up the rules.
Well, because like I said, if it's just getting wet, then any liquid could work. But I wonder if he said specifically water because any other kind of liquid would cause some kind of genetic impurity that would result in a less dangerous creature. Like if I dumped Coca-Cola on a mogwai, maybe all its teeth fall out when it multiplies.
The rule says do not let it come in contact with water.
I think snow is fine.
Okay.
It's frozen and it's a solid, and yeah, you might get wet as a result, but I still think that it has to be enough of an amount for it to count.
Okay.
And plus, like I said, what if they also eat their young when they multiply to save more food?
So the current running theory is that gremlins are tundra animals that when they get wet enough to multiply, they eat the babies.
Sometimes, yes. Well, because that to me makes sense, because otherwise you would just have these creatures basically controlling the world. But if you have that kind of specific rule set, then it limits the scope of where they can be.
I'm going to watch the movie clip on silent just to see how much water it got exposed to.
All right, do you have a way to measure that?
I was just going to visually quantify it.
Gotcha. All right, empirical evidence. Adam, while Don's doing that, let's talk about flat Earth theory. Now, the thing about flat Earth theory is that it makes perfect sense. If I had a frisbee and a basketball, I could demonstrate, and a glass of water, I could demonstrate exactly why it makes sense.
I'm sure you could.
All right. If we're ready to move on from that.
Yes.
So what happened in the movie is this kid has a jar of water with paintbrushes in it, but it looks like clean water. And he accidentally knocks it over onto the mogwai, but immediately picks it up. So not all the water was spilled onto it, but some water got on it.
Would you say that was a good chunk of water?
A good chunk of water.
A good chunk of water. So, like...
Oh, and then it just starts shooting the babies out of its back.
Doesn't that kid like break all 3 rules in like 15 minutes of the film?
I know they all got broken, but I don't remember how quickly.
No one said kids are responsible. Who would give a kid, even I think it was the dad or something, wasn't it, that gave this kid this mogwai and was like, yeah, you're probably responsible enough to take care of it. Yeah, so at least it has to at least be a concentrated amount of water then. So things like rain could happen if it got wet enough, but it has to be wet enough. So I would say since snow is frozen, then either the effect is severely delayed and they are able to dry off by the time they get out of it, or it has to be a lot of water at once. That's what makes the most
and maybe the number of like babies it makes depends on the amount of water.
True.
Because it does look limited. It had water spilled on it, and then it made some, a few new ones, and then that was that.
Do you think they have in their little group like a specific set of mogwais that jump into water every now and then to give birth to new mogwais? Yeah, and then they round up the ones that they're gonna eat and let the ones that they're gonna let live go.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Because again, I think it's safe to say mogwais are probably cannibals.
So, would a mogwai be sort of like a cold-blooded creature and be able to change the body temperature so it doesn't melt the snow?
Well,
because if I just pick up snow with my bare hand, it's gonna melt.
I remember in the movie, when they transform into gremlins, they definitely look a lot more scaly and they aren't as furry. So I would say that they probably do have some kind of reptilian aspects to them that could perhaps achieve something like that.
But then they couldn't live in the snow. I think maybe their fur is just thick enough to trap the heat well, because otherwise they'd have to be eating more, So let's say that their fur is thick enough to trap the heat. Maybe when they transform, they become reptilian, and maybe that's why they're not a problem, because if they're in the snow and they transform, then maybe they die. Yeah.
Are they scaly or are they just leathery?
Well, either way, they lose their fur.
Yeah.
So maybe that's how they're able to keep the actual gremlin population under control. See, guys, I like this. We're adding depth to the Gremlins movie.
Which none of us have seen recently, so.
No, but I think it's safe to say that we're the official authority on Gremlins.
Oh, sure.
If you think you know more than about Gremlins than we do, I would love to hear your take.
Luckily, we don't have an actual audience, so nobody's going to let us know in the comments how wrong we are.
We have that one person that subscribed to us.
Fair enough.
A bot.
So if they don't let us know in the comments that we're wrong, then by default we're right.
Exactly. Let's just say that about everything. Until until we grow an audience and somebody can tell us that we're wrong, we're just automatically right.
Yeah.
So we're always right until we're told wrong.
Exactly. Just like everything in life. That's how science works, Adam. You're always right until you're proven wrong.
Oh, I didn't know that's how it worked.
I thought
Yeah,
that was
I mean-
the law system, but
I mean, do you remember when the sun was not the center of the universe or our galaxy? That was right until it was wrong. But now we're getting too philosophical about
the definition of right and wrong.
exactly. That's a different podcast. Join us for Creature Philosophy Clash. So I think we've laid out some pretty decent rules and guidelines for how Mogwais and Gremlins are able to exist. Because we gave them a biome, we gave them feeding habits, we gave them just basic rules on how to be alive. And then I would imagine that any gremlins that exist in Asia, Europe, or America were forcefully brought there. So now that we got the whole Mogwai situation completely thought out, can we talk about... So guys, let's talk about mimics now. Mimics suck. And they are probably the most unfair thing I can think of in terms of monsters and creatures. Because anything can be a mimic. Literally anything.
Is there a size limit on it?
No, right? Because there could be a house mimic, or a dresser mimic, or chest. Well, chest mimic is more common, but I'm pretty sure anything can be a mimic if you try hard enough. Or does it have to open and close?
No,
Because
like a table I think could be a mimic, right?
a piano can be a mimic because you can open a piano up. But I don't know if a table, because it has to have a mouth. So I would imagine that it would have to be something that can be opened and shut. But if anything can be a mimic, then doesn't that make them probably the most unfair creatures to exist?
I think there's got to be a size limit based on the actual creature's size, because isn't it just polymorphing?
So maybe there are more powerful mimics. Maybe some mimics are more powerful than others. But I mean, even polymorphing, I would think you would be able to transform into something bigger than yourself.
I mean,
Let's
Adam's
try
the
and-
expert on this, right?
Yeah. Adam, would you say you can polymorph into something bigger than yourself?
so mimics, in a common sense, like the most common mimics, would probably be your standard like chest size, so probably like standard furniture. But there are things that in Dungeons and Dragons refer to as greater mimics that can be things that are as large as small buildings, or like large statues, or massive stone tombs.
Now that would be scary. Could you imagine if you went to a museum to look at the statue of David, and all of a sudden just goes, tries to eat you? That would be terrifying. That would make Night at the Museum a lot more interesting. Which, by the way, Night at the Museum really missed horror opportunity. Great movie, but
It's a kids movie.
so was Zootopia, but it could have been better.
Oh.
Anyway, getting back to mimics. So yeah, basically almost anything can be a mimic, which I think is complete and total bullcrap. Because that would make mimics basically, if you think about it, the alligators of D&D.
The alligators?
Yes, because they are apex predators. They're super deadly. You're almost never going to survive an encounter with one. And now they can literally be anything and everything.
I don't know if I'd call them like super deadly. I guess it depends on the party.
That's true. I think that there should be restrictions on what can be a mimic.
Like rules for its transformations.
I think
Yes.
I don't know what their lifespan is, but I think a mimic sort of goes through an age cycle, much like legendary creatures or like dragons and krakens, where the older they get, the larger they become. So I think probably a mimic that is probably like a century or so old could probably be a greater mimic and be these larger objects.
Could
that
you
would be
imagine?
my take on it.
Could you imagine if there was a mimic that was really bad at being a mimic, and it just stayed as a chest its entire life? So 2 centuries later, a venturing party comes up and they're like, "That is one big chest." I don't know how to get up there.
That would be funny. Like
That would be funny.
an unusually low intelligence or wisdom or something. And
Right. I feel like Adam's gonna use all the D&D stuff we're talking in the game that we're playing, and we're just not telling our other party members. So, Dawn, you and I will come up across something, or the party will come up across something that you and I understand what's going on, but nobody else does. And we're
no
just
metagaming.
uh,
No metagaming.
no metagaming. Yeah, we can't say anything.
Nope.
It would be interesting though. So if you think about it, if a mimic can turn into a building, can that mimic fit other mimics inside of it? Can there be a mimic inside of a mimic? Because then wouldn't the inside mimic be sort of like a tapeworm?
I would say yes, but I don't DM any
Possibly.
games.
Now, when you have to think about it, so like if a mimic is a chest, then its mouth is like the hatch of the chest, the lid closing down, so it's going to have teeth and stuff, and then there's some sort of digestive system inside of it, of the chest. So when you take a mimic as a house stance, maybe it consumed another mimic, but like it's not like somebody is actually going to walk inside this house. The mimic is going to eat it in some fashion. It's not like a hollowed house that somebody can live inside of a mimic. I don't think that's how that would work.
That makes sense. Like you don't open a mimic chest and actually have treasure inside.
Right.
I thought that in some fantasy cases, though, a person will see gold or something inside of the chest that they open, and so they reach their hand inside, and then it closes down on them.
Maybe the mimic ate some gold to do that.
Maybe. I kind of like the idea, though, of mimics having that sort of illusionary magic, though, because I think it would also make them more deadly. Even though I'm complaining about them being too deadly already.
Yeah.
I still think it would be cool if they had that sort of illusionary aspect to them, where it's sort of like, think of it like a poisonous spore effect, but instead of taking away your life, it causes you to hallucinate things that you would associate a mimic with. So if it was a chest and you got too close to it, you would start hallucinating gold inside of the chest. And if it was a house and you went into it, you would start hallucinating like furniture and everything else.
Well, then by that logic, there still wouldn't be a mimic inside the house because it's just
True.
a hallucination.
True.
But so just to be clear, you think that mimics are too overpowered, but you think it would be cooler if they were more overpowered?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I hate the idea of just walking into a random shop and let's say you buy a health potion or a trinket on, and all of a sudden it's a mimic. But I would also like them to have a bit more mystery to them. It's a love-hate relationship.
The player hates the mimic. The DM loves the mimic.
Yes, basically. Because I love the idea of there being mimic health potions. I love that idea because that would just screw over people so badly.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't done that to us yet.
I know. Well, because I knew you would see it coming.
Oh,
I'm waiting.
because we inspect everything we buy now that
yes.
we know you.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the moment when your guard is down and then boom, spring a little mimic potion on you.
Now, I would come up with the argument that I don't think a mimic health potion would come from a storekeeper, because a mimic doesn't have a very high intelligence in D&D sense, so it probably would try to take a bite at that storekeeper at some point while it's in that stock. So it probably could be a health potion that was probably found inside of a dungeon or looted off of an undead or something like that.
Okay. Well, then by that logic, though, the low intelligence, it wouldn't necessarily wait until the person was low on health, right? Or does it have high enough intelligence for that?
Um, I
They would probably
mean,
wait until you opened it up or you put it close enough to some exposed part of your body until it took a bite. Because I can't, because if it's a health potion mimic, then it's probably pretty small. So I can't imagine that it would actually attack something bigger than itself. But if you put it next to something that was exposed, like your face, then it would probably lunge for that, like your eye or something.
What happens if you put a mimic in a bag of holding? Does it die?
Ooh, it's a good question.
it needs
And
to
then,
because it is a living creature.
okay, and then if you reach into a bag of holding, trying to go for a health potion, and there's a dead mimic in there instead, would you pull it out or would it be stuck in there? Because it's not a health potion.
At that point, the mimic sort of like melts off of its disguise into just like a sticky adhesive ooze, as it's sort of described.
Well, that's what I mean.
So I don't think you would pull out a health potion. You would have no idea there'd be a mimic in there, and so in order to discover where that health potion went, you'd probably have to turn your bag of holding inside out to dump all the contents out to learn what happened to that health potion.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because you have to have in mind what you're grabbing, and you wouldn't be grabbing a health potion.
Can mimics be enchanted? Can you enchant a mimic?
I'm sure there are ways to enchant living creatures.
Because what if a mimic transformed into a bag, and then I put a bag of holding enchantment on it? Then it would be this vacuous, constantly eating thing, right?
I feel like that enchantment would just fail.
I don't know how to answer that question. I really don't.
But hypothetically, what if that were true? What if you could put a sort of bag of holding enchantment on a mimic, and then it just kept eating? Or what if it was never full? What if it could never be full?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with it. If we're speaking hypothetically, I think that mimic is going to be constantly starving because it's never being satisfied.
It would
Well,
probably
you can fill up a bag of holding.
That's true. Yeah, it does have weight limit.
Yeah, but would its organs be gone now? Or would its organs be in the bag of holding and then therefore not active in use?
I think it would just die.
Maybe. I'm curious about that though, because that would be interesting to see. Somebody who has had years of D&D/D&D lore experience and knowledge trying to figure that one out.
Oh, that would be Adam.
That would be Adam. Adam, your job is to figure out if that's possible. And you'll figure that out and we'll get back to it next week, but
okay.
It would be crazy to have sort of this black hole mimic constantly eating things and terrorizing wherever it was.
All right. Well, I will think about an answer for you.
Don, what is the worst thing you think a mimic could transform into? Like, if you saw it, you would be instantly fooled.
Well, I don't know about, like, if the worst thing is being instantly fooled, then maybe like a table or a chair, because it's, that's like unsuspecting. But like the worst thing, I liked your idea of a health potion, because that's when you need it, right? You need the health, and then you're attacked.
Right.
Then you're like taking a monster into another battle.
That's true. Maybe there should be different variations of mimics. Like maybe the smaller mimics are more like parasite mimics, where they're not necessarily gonna devour their host all at once, or their target all at once, but maybe a health potion mimic would have some sort of poison when it bit you, so you would be paralyzed, and then it could feast off of you longer. And then your regular size mimics are just the average man-eaters, and then the larger mimics are some sort of giant killing machines, essentially.
I think a small mimic being able to paralyze you would be pretty overpowered if it's supposed to be like a lower class mimic.
But it would have low attack. Like you can be paralyzed in D&D, but not die instantly from whatever's attacking you. So maybe the attack roll on it is really low. So its victims are suffering longer, but you still have more time to get away.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like first edition carrion crawlers. Their tentacles were poisonous and it would paralyze you, and then they would just lay eggs all around the paralyzed
Ew.
creature.
That's horrible.
Yep. How that happened to me as a child back in
Oh my
Oh, man.
gosh.
Adam, I can't believe that happened to you.
yeah, that was nightmare fuel.
Why is first edition so creepy?
Because that was the good old days when they didn't care about stuff for life.
First edition was brutal.
Yeah. That's when the game first came out, so of course it wouldn't be entirely balanced.
10 out of 10 would go back and play again.
It does bring up a good point, though. How do mimics reproduce?
You got me.
They have to have some sort of reproduction if they keep existing. So, but like you said, they're centuries old. They have the life cycle of dragons. So maybe in D&D, all the mimics that exist have existed since the beginning. And now they're just scattered out in the world, eating whatever they want. And so it's possible to exterminate all mimics from the world. Like maybe there is no second generation of mimics. Maybe it's all first generation.
So I'm reading, I don't know if this is right, so I'm not going to claim that this is right, but I looked it up, and this said that when they get to a big enough size, because they're like slime-like, they'll split in half, and then there will be 2 mimics.
Ooh. So asexual reproduction then.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that blows my theory out of the water.
So they either become selfish and choose to be a greater mimic, or they continue on their legacy and split off.
Yeah, and this says that you can assume that the mimics have identical stats at the time of splitting. So it's like 2 clones.
Interesting.
But yeah, they'd be half the size that they were before.
Could a mimic? Well, because they're slime, basically. Right? Mimics are gooey, slimy creatures that can polymorph into anything.
In a sense.
Could they also infect other things? Like, if there was a dead giant's body somewhere, could they control the giant's body like a parasite almost? Or no?
I would say no. Only looking at what their publications of a mimic are in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, in another setting, if you want, you could totally make them a parasitic entity that could host dead bodies and use it.
But that would probably make them something else entirely. Not necessarily mimics, because they're not mimicking anything. They're taking control over something. I would love to do a campaign where I would just be a mimic that was really bad at being a mimic. Like, I would just be a chest in the middle of the road. There's no one around. This is how I'll get my meal. So mimics are basically just these beings that can be anything, if you think about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't think they could be anything living.
Yeah, that's where I was about to go. Is like I think they're limited to replicating an object.
Like stationary, can't move objects. Although, if a mimic existed in the modern day world, do you think there could be a car mimic?
Sure.
Or do you think that it would have to be a mimic that is the outer shell of a car, and therefore would have to have an engine put inside of it in order to run? But if they can't move, like if they're supposed to be objects that can't move, then would a mimic be successful in today's modern world?
Yes.
Oh yeah, probably you're right.
I'd say so because there are so many people in this world, and we are, as a human race, are massive consumers and lots of useless things. So yes, I think mimics would be very successful.
Could you imagine if Amazon had an entire shipment of mimic boxes that they didn't know about, and they just sent them out to all these different parts over the world? That would be an amazing apocalypse. All I wanted was my headphones. 3-day shipping. No. I would watch a movie like that or experience a campaign like that, because that would be a very amazing. Like, let's say there was this super giant mimic that has spent years growing and consuming and just became this incredibly tall, huge thing. And then it split itself into a million cardboard boxes, over a million or a billion cardboard boxes. And it just, all those boxes just got shipped out to different places all over the world. That would be crazy.
Mimics being the main enemy of a...
Yes, mimics would be the main enemy of everyone, the human race. Creatures in general. I wonder if you could keep a pet mimic. Just feed it rabbits.
So you want to go down the road of domesticating mimics?
Yes. Let's say I want to domesticate a mimic. Do you think that would be possible?
I mean, if you want to go through that long process, but I don't think, like, unless you're a fantasy race that has an extended, like, lifespan, I don't think you would see it in your life anytime soon.
But I mean, you could just feed your little mimic pet like live rabbits or something. Because mimics can't eat all the time; they would have to get full at some point. So if you just kept it full, then it would probably listen to you, because it wouldn't be fending for itself. It would be completely domesticated after a certain time.
I'm just gonna say, if you have a mimic as a pet, you would never know you'd have a pet.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. You won't know where it's at. You don't know what's a mimic and what's not in your house at that point.
That would be a terrifying life.
Yeah, and imagine it starting to split into two, and then you'd have two pets all of a sudden. Next thing you know, your house is breathing.
You know what else? Mimics could also be used as great tools of sabotage. Because imagine if you were at war with another country, and so you sent somebody to sell them weapons or armor or shields or whatever, and all of that stuff was mimics. The entire army just wiped out in seconds.
Like, not really biological warfare, but like that kind of idea of a hidden enemy.
Yeah, because you could sell them helmets. You could sell them mimic helmets, and they would bite their heads off as soon as they put them on.
So sort of like the Trojan horse.
Yeah, but like more deadly.
Yeah, I mean,
because you could put a sleeping spell on them, sell them as helmets. Then when they woke up, they would eat whoever head they were on.
But how do you get the mimic to turn into a helmet? Magic? Polymorph it magically?
I don't know. Is a mimic like a ditto, where if you put something in front of it, it'll transform into it? Because if you think about it, if the most common mimic is a chest, that means that it has to know that humans and creatures of higher intelligence are drawn to chests. So it has to have seen a bunch of people or creatures open chests in order to be like, that's what I'm going to be.
So put it in a room full of helmets, it'll become a helmet?
Yes, exactly. See, now we're coming up with more deadly ways to make mimics.
Yeah, I feel like this is my mistake because you guys both DM the game that I'm in. My thinking contributing to this.
Just better be careful about whatever you grab now.
Yeah,
instead of checking for traps and checking for genies, you're gonna have to check for mimics. Which, Adam, can I check for genies?
Well, considering how we are in an official session, no, not right now.
Yeah.
So strangely enough, the mimic thing about putting a mimic in a room full of helmets, and then it'll eventually become a helmet, and then you don't know what's a mimic and what's a helmet. There was an old creature back in first edition. It looks like it existed in second edition too. That I encountered. It was referred to as a gold bug, which looked exactly like a gold coin, and it would sit in piles of treasure. Then when you looted it, it would bite you and poison you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's awesome. See, we need more stuff like
Yeah.
this in newer versions of D&D. They've totally nerfed it because it's more accessible now, which is good. But they've completely nerfed it and have taken out a lot of cool stuff to make it easier.
I would still go back and run a first edition game. I would
I
do
would
it.
love that. I would totally play a first edition game and just die instantly.
Yeah, considering how from fifth edition where you have max hit points at level 1, first edition you roll it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, do you think that we got everything covered that we're going to get covered?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all for listening to episode 2 of Creature Clash. We hope to hear you all next time. So goodbye.